At the very beginning of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, we find these words in the first beatitude. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5 and verse 3. Well, in stating this beatitude first, Jesus points his hearers back to a principle that has always been true of those who would seek God and his kingdom. Now, although it would be easy to view poor in this text as a reference to material wealth, when the two are taken together, because Luke's parallel in Luke 6 and verse 20 talks about one who lacks spirit. Well, when we look at these two together, it's clear that Jesus is speaking of a spiritual condition, not the amount of money or possessions that one has. One can be materially rich but spiritually poor, but one can also be materially poor and spiritually rich. And it's also true that a person can be both materially and spiritually rich, or even both materially and spiritually poor. But the key is found in the heart and the attitude of the individual. In order for us to seek the kingdom, and in the end, without seeking it cannot be found, one must become convinced of their spiritual need. The individual must realize their utter spiritual destitution, meaning that we cannot come to God, we cannot be saved without God. And we must come to the realization that we must come to Him, that we cannot buy our way into heaven, we cannot earn our way or merit our way into heaven, that the only way that we can be pleasing to God is that we must become totally dependent upon God. We recognize our spiritual poverty, and we come to Him because only He, through His grace and through our obedience to His will, can make us spiritually rich. Now, as with so many of Jesus' statements in the Sermon on the Mount, there's nothing particularly new or revolutionary in this idea. It's always been true that it's the spiritually poor who encounter God in a truly authentic way, since they place their dependence upon Him. You know, David, although he was not materially poor either during his youth or later as king, he could pen these words to God describing his spiritual need in Psalm 40. But may all who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. May those who love your salvation say continually, Great is the Lord. As for me, I'm poor and needy, but the Lord takes thought for me. You are my help and my deliverer. Do not delay, O my God, verses 16 and 17. Now this thought is not unique to just this one psalm. David again in Psalm 86 verses 1 and 2 says, Incline your ear, O Lord, and answer me, for I am poor and needy. Preserve my life, for I am godly. Save your servant who trusts in you. You are my God. It was this attitude that kept David returning to God when he sinned against Him. We see this in the matter of Bathsheba in 2 Samuel 11 and 12, but also in the matter of the census in 2 Samuel 24. In fact, one of the greatest descriptions that we find of one who is penitent, one who has a repentant heart, is found in the life of David after he had turned back to God after his affair with Bathsheba. David recognized his own spiritual poverty and his dependence upon God, and that dependence was emphasized through the trials and the struggles that he faced in his life, both personally and as the king of Israel. But God has always desired that people seek Him with this type of attitude. Through the pen of Isaiah, God said, All these things my hand has made, and so all these things came to be, declares the Lord. But this is the one to whom I will look, he who is humble and contrite in spirit and trembles at my word. Elsewhere in Isaiah, God says that He dwells not only in high holiness, but also with those who are poor in spirit. For thus says the one who is high and lifted up, who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy, I dwell in the high and holy place, and also with him who is of a contrite and lowly spirit, to revive the spirit of the lowly, and to revive the heart of the contrite. Friends, what an incredible thought that is, that the Creator of the universe, the sustainer of its very existence, dwells with us. And it is only our spiritual poverty that makes it possible for us to have that relationship with Him. And so, whenever we think about this idea of being poor in spirit, Do we recognize our need for God? Do we recognize the spiritual sickness that we find ourselves in when we are outside of Christ? If not, then we encourage you to examine yourself and to come to that realization that without God, just as the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, without God, we are nothing. Friends, we thank you for joining us for our program today, and have a blessed day.